What would you do if the price of love was losing everything? A diamond ring sparkling on her finger, the most sincere vow of your life. But instead of applause, you're met with a bucket of ice water from your powerful father. If you marry her, you're no longer my son. Tonight, James stands at a brutal crossroads. On one side is a multi-billion-dollar empire and the prestigious lineage that has raised him for 30 years. On the other is a woman with nothing to her name, yet she is the only one who has ever stitched back his broken soul. Wealth in solitude or bankruptcy for freedom, James chose a path that no one saw coming, an act that sent shockwaves through the entire Sun Empire. Join me as we watch James's world split in two, proving that sometimes to find yourself, you have to be brave enough to lose it all. James and Diep's story isn't just a drama about love. It's a lesson in the courage to live authentically. If James's choice moves you, or if you just want to support those fighting for their own freedom, hit that like button right now to spread the message of true love. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because I'll be back with more soul-stirring stories and dramatic twists you won't find anywhere else. Now tell me in the comments, if you were James, would you choose the kingdom or love? Let's get into the story. The golden lights in the vast living room of the Vuong mansion cast a glow that was luxurious yet cold. The scent of expensive sandalwood mingled with the dampness of the thunderstorm outside, creating a thick, suffocating atmosphere. James stood there, his hands trembling uncontrollably inside his pockets. In his left pocket, the small diamond ring felt like it weighed 1,000 tons. It wasn't just jewelry. It was his ticket out of a labyrinth of rules and loneliness. James looked at the woman standing beside him, Lynn. She wore a simple dress, her delicate face completely natural, without a trace of makeup, but her eyes held the kind of peace he had craved his entire life. He took a deep breath, feeling as if his lungs were filled with shards of broken glass. For 30 years, James had lived like a ghost in his own home. He was the pride of the family, the perfect heir, molded by the iron fist of his father Thomas. His father had given him everything the world's most prestigious schools' custom-tailored suits, and a future guaranteed by unthinkable numbers in a bank account. But he had never given James the right to cry, the right to fail, or simply the right to choose who to love. The relationship between father and son wasn't a bond. It was a long-term investment contract, and James was the prize asset. Then Lynn appeared. She had no status, no designer clothes, but she healed his shattered soul with the little things: a warm bowl of soup when he was sick, an encouraging smile when he was exhausted by the corporate grind, and the freedom to finally be himself. Tonight, James decided to end his life of obedience. He slowly knelt down one knee, hitting the expensive Persian rug. Red. His heart hammered against his ribs, like it was trying to burst out of his chest. He looked up at Lynn, his voice catching in his throat, as he prepared to make the vow that would bind them forever. But just as his lips parted, a deep, bone-chilling voice echoed from the shadows of a leather armchair. "Stand up, James. Don't make me watch you disgrace this family name with such a pathetic display." Thomas stepped into the light, his face like a slab of granite, completely void of emotion. The way he looked at Lynn wasn't even with contempt. It was total erasure, as if she didn't even exist in his world. Silence filled the room. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like a hammer pounding into James's brain. He didn't stand up. He stayed there on one knee, gripping Lynn's freezing hand. This defiance was something Thomas never saw coming. He walked closer every footstep, carrying the heavy authority of a ruler. He leaned down, his voice a low hiss in James's ear. "You think love is going to feed you. You think this woman will stick around when you have nothing left. Listen closely, James. If you marry her, you're no longer my son. If you walk out that door with her tonight, you lose everything. Your status, your fortune, the very name you carry. It all gets wiped clean. You'll be a nobody, penniless in the real world. Are you really ready to trade a kingdom for a fantasy?" James felt his world collapsing. Memories rushed back like a flood. He remembered the sleepless nights studying under his father's watch, the surge of pride the first time his father patted his shoulder after a successful deal. This was the man who raised him, who gave him the protection millions only dream of. Betraying his father felt like tearing his own skin off, but then he looked at Lynn. He saw the single tear rolling down her cheek. He saw the understanding and the sheer sacrifice in her eyes. She squeezed his hand as if to say, "Choose your father. I won't blame you." In that moment, James realized a painful truth. His father loved the prestige he brought to the family, but Lynn loved him. His father's love was a golden shackle. Lynn's love was the wings that let him fly. James took a long breath. The shaking stopped, replaced by an eerie calm. He stood up, but not to obey. He stood tall, facing the most powerful man in his life. "You're right, Dad," James said, his voice echoing through the hollow room. "You gave me everything I needed to be a successful man. You taught me how to win, how to dominate, and how to never fail. But you forgot to teach me how to love and be loved. You gave me a life of luxury, but my soul died in this mansion a long time ago. If the price of being your son is giving up the only person who makes me feel alive, then I'm sorry, but that price is too high. I can't pay it." Thomas stepped back, his eyes flashing with shock and pure rage. He couldn't believe his perfect masterpiece was actually fighting back. "Get out!" He roared, the sound tearing through the room. "Get out right now. Don't you ever come crawling back for forgiveness." James didn't say another word. He took off his Patek Philippe watch, a piece worth a small fortune, and set it on the table. He stripped off his expensive blazer, leaving him in just a simple white dress shirt. He took Lynn's hand and led her away. Every step toward the front door felt like shedding the weight of his past. When the heavy oak doors swung open, the thunderstorm hit his face bitter cold, but incredibly refreshing. James and Lynn stepped out into the pitch-black night. Behind them, the lights of the mansion cut out, symbolizing the end of an era in his heart. They stood in the rain, soaked to the bone, with no money, no title, and nothing but each other. But in that moment, as lightning cracked across the sky, James knelt down once more on the soaked ground. He took out the ring, his hands no longer shaking. "Lynn, I'm not the heir to the Vuong family anymore. I'm just James, a man with nothing to his name but a heart that belongs entirely to you. Will you walk this storm with me for the rest of our lives?" Lynn burst into tears, happy sobs mingling with the falling rain. She nodded and threw her arms around him. That night, James's world truly split in two. On one side, a brilliant but cold past. On the other, an uncertain but warm future. He had lost everything, but in the end, he had finally found himself. James stood frozen in the office hallway. The phone in his hand was still warm, but a chill was spreading from his palm straight to his heart. The long, hollow dial tone sounded like a heart monitor flatlining. Outside, the city was still buzzing, people rushing through the fading golden sunlight. But in James's world, everything had stopped. His father's words weren't just a threat. They were a death sentence. Consider us dead to each other. Those 6 words hit like a collapsing wall, burying the 30 years of life he had painstakingly built to please his father. He went back to his desk, but the numbers on the screen were now just meaningless blurs. James looked down at his hands meant to sign million-dollar contracts, not to take hold of his own destiny. He thought back to the first time he met Diep. It was a pouring afternoon and his car had broken down in a poor neighborhood. Diep, with her sun-drenched smile and an apron stained with flour from her small bakery, had helped him without having a clue who he was. With Diep, James wasn't the heir to the Sun Fat Group. He was just James, a guy who liked pastries and always forgot his car keys. But in his father's eyes, that simplicity was a crime. Mr. Sun saw life as a chessboard, where every move his son made had to yield a profit. Diep, with her humble background, was a wrong move. He couldn't understand that the very poverty he despised held the one asset he never had: sincerity without an ulterior motive. As evening fell, James left the office later than usual. He drove aimlessly until his feet, or perhaps his heart, led him to the front of Diep's bakery. Through the steam-fogged glass, he saw her busy cleaning up occasionally, wiping sweat from her forehead. He stood there on the border of 2 worlds. On one side, the luxury lights of the mansion and a bright future in his father's shadow. On the other, the scent of flour and the struggle for a living, but filled with laughter. James walked in, the bell on the door chiming. Diep looked up, a bright smile on her face that quickly faded when she saw how pale he was. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. James didn't answer right away. He stepped closer and pulled her into a tight hug, as if letting go would mean being swept away by the storm outside. He breathed in the soft scent of vanilla in her hair, the scent of peace. "Diep," James whispered, his voice raw. "If tomorrow I'm no longer the son of the Vuong family, if I don't have the luxury cars or the money, if I'm just a man starting over from nothing, do you still want to go through with this wedding?" Diep went quiet for a moment. She looked deep into his eyes, seeing past the mask of wealth he wore. She gave a small smile, sad but steady. "I never loved your car or your name. I loved the man who sat in this bakery eating ramen with me. As long as you are you, I'll be there, no matter where we end up." Diep's words were the spark that burned the last chain in James's heart. He realized that the family legacy his father protected so fiercely was really just a magnificent glass cage, but suffocating. He pulled out his phone, his fingers steady now. He composed a short text to Mr. Sun. "Dad, I've made my choice. I'm choosing to live as a human being instead of a perfect pawn. Starting tomorrow, I'm standing on my own 2 feet." The moment he hit sent a strange sense of relief washed over him. He loosened his expensive silk tie and took off the commemorative watch his father had given him on graduation day. placing them both on the bakery's worn wooden table. Those items belonged to a James who no longer existed. That night, a thunderstorm rolled over the city. The thunder roared like the furious shouting of an old man in a lonely mansion. But in a small corner of the city, in a tiny bakery loft, two people leaned on each other. James knew the road ahead would be incredibly hard. He'd have to learn how to count every penny, how to work without his family's safety net, and how to face the cold shoulders of people who used to worship him. But looking into Diep's eyes, he knew he had won. He had lost a fortune, but he had reclaimed his life. In the moment, James's world split in two. He chose the side lit by love. He realized that a real home isn't built with gold bricks, but with understanding and freedom. And for the first time in his life, James fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, to the sound of rain drumming on the tin roof, the music of a freedom that cost him a kingdom. The wind on the hilltop began to blow harder, carrying the biting chill of early night. But James's embrace felt as hot as a fire burning in the middle of a vast wilderness. Diep looked down at the ring on her finger. The tiny diamonds seemed to catch the last light of the day, shining with a fragile hope. She felt the weight of that ring, not because of its price tag, but because of the weight of the empire James had just walked away from. James stayed on his knees, his head resting gently on Diep's trembling hands. He didn't want her to see the tears welling up, not out of weakness, but because this liberation was so sudden and so painful. For 30 years, he had lived like a tree shaped inside a golden pot. His roots were trapped by the walls of expectation, and his branches had to grow in whatever direction his father pointed. Tonight, for the first time, he had smashed that expensive pot to let his roots finally touch the earth, even if the soil was dry and full of rocks. Ly Tu Diep. James seed his voice, low blending into the rustling wind. I lived in that mansion for so many years, but I never truly belonged there. I had the most expensive suits, but they always made it hard to breathe. I had the fastest cars, but they never took me where I wanted to go. Only with you in that little bakery, smelling of flour and laughter, did I feel like I could actually breathe. If the price of this air is being penniless, then I'll take being penniless for the rest of my life. Diep knelt down with him, her vision blurred by tears. She reached out to stroke his face strong, but lined with the exhaustion of his old life. She knew that starting tomorrow, there would be no more five-star dinners or lavish parties. Instead, there would be utility bills rent and sleepless nights worrying about making ends meet. She whispered softly, "James, do you regret it? It's a storm out there, and I only have these small hands." James smiled the brightest smile Diep had ever seen. He took her hands and kissed them gently. "These hands are what made and the sweetest pastries I've ever tasted. These hands wiped my tears when I collapsed under my father's pressure. To me, these hands are the entire world. The world out there can turn against us, and my father can strike my name from the family tree, but he can never strike you from my heart." They sat together on a flat rock, watching the valley below begin to light up. The shimmering lights looked like distant stars, representing thousands of different lives carrying on. James looked toward his family's mansion, a cold speck of light on the horizon. He knew that right now, Mr. Sun was likely sitting in his study, furious and alone, surrounded by soulless stone walls. He felt pity for his father, a man who had everything but actually had nothing because he had never understood the feeling of loving someone enough to risk it all. As night fell and shadows swallowed the hillside, the ring on Diep's finger caught the light beautifully. James stood up and helped Diep to her feet. He grabbed a thick coat from the car, draped it over her shoulders, and then quietly unbuckled his luxury watch. He looked at it one last time, the symbol of the time management and control his father had imposed on him. He set the watch down on the rock, leaving it behind on that hilltop as a final goodbye to his past. "Let's go," James said, gripping Diep's hand. "We have a wedding to plan and a new life to write." They got into the car, the engine humming in the silence. As they drove down the slope, James didn't look in the rearview mirror once. Ahead of them was a dark road, no streetlights, no guarantees. But inside the car, the warmth of Diep's hand and the light of his newfound faith were enough to light the way. In the moment, James's world split in two. He chose the half with Diep. He realized that true wealth isn't in what we own, but in what we are willing to give up for love. That night, on the wide highway heading toward the city, there was a man who had just lost a massive fortune. Yet he was smiling because he knew he had just become the richest man in the world. For the first time in his life, he was completely free. The dry clink of a silver spoon against Ming Dynasty porcelain echoed through the Sun family dining room, sounding as harsh and final as a nail being driven into a coffin. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, brilliant as ever, but it wasn't enough to warm Mr. Sun's stone-cold face. He sat there, back straight, every strand of his white hair perfectly in place, but his eyes were a bottomless pit of loneliness and rage. Mrs. Huyen sat opposite him, her thin shoulders trembling slightly. She stared at the empty chair at the head of the table, the chair James had occupied for 30 years, always on time, always polished, and always silent. "You're hurting your own son," she whispered, her voice as thin as a fraying thread. Those words were like a match tossed into a powder keg. Mr. Sun slammed his hand on the table, making the water glasses rattle. He's doing this to himself. He's throwing away an entire empire for some cheap emotion. That girl isn't worthy of him. She's not on his level. Mrs. Huyen looked up, and for the first time in her life, she looked at her powerful husband with pure pity. "Level? Are you talking about bank balances or the framed diplomas covering the walls?" Diep was the one who stayed up all night outside the ER when James had his accident last year, while you were busy signing a contract in Singapore. She's kind, and she stayed by his side through storms you didn't even know were happening. "I don't care." Mr. Sun roared, his voice bouncing off the cold marble walls. "I created him. I molded him to be a leader. If he chooses to drag himself through the mud with that girl, then he's dead to me. As of today, his name is scrubbed from every corporate document. He's about to find out just how brutal the world is without the Sun name to protect him." Meanwhile, in another part of the city, where the air was thick with the scent of fresh produce, damp earth, and the morning market chatter, James's world was moving to a completely different beat. James appeared at Diep's vegetable stall. His hair was a bit messy from the wind, and his white shirt was frayed at the sleeves, a shirt he never would have worn back at the mansion. But his eyes were glowing with a light his mother had never seen in him. He wasn't Master James anymore. He was just James, a man standing in front of the woman he loved. We start planning today. James smiled, his voice incredibly warm despite the city noise. Even if my father refuses to come, even if he cuts me off, even if it's just you and me standing there, we are still having a wedding. Diep stopped sorting through the fresh greens and looked at him, worry written all over her face. James, I just heard. He ordered all your bank cards to be frozen. How are you going to live? You've never had to worry about money. James took her hands, which were damp with morning dew, and pulled her close. He looked around the humble market, where working-class people were busy making a living. Do you see them? Thousands of people out here live, love, and find happiness without a black card or a prestigious title. I have my hands, I have my brain, and most importantly, I have you. The things my father took away are just objects. The things you give me, self-respect and love, no one can touch those. In that moment, in a simple vegetable stall, James and Diep began writing the first lines of their new chapter. They didn't talk about luxury menus or designer wedding dresses worth tens of thousands of dollars. They talked about a small backyard party, the real friends who would actually show up for them, and the tiny apartment they would decorate together with wildflowers. James knew the road ahead wouldn't be paved with roses. He'd have to interview for jobs with a clean slate without a family recommendation attached to his name. He'd have to learn how to wear supermarket clothes and budget every cent. But every time he saw Diep smile, he felt stronger than ever. He realized that the poverty his father feared so much was actually total freedom. By noon, as the sun grew intense, James was still patiently standing by Diep's side, helping her bag vegetables for customers. The hands that used to sign massive contracts were now holding bunches of herbs and potatoes. A few of his father's acquaintances walked by looking at him with mockery and scorn, but James only responded with a polite nod and a calm smile. His pride no longer came from what he owned, but from the courage to live authentically. Last night, when he was kicked out, he thought he had lost everything. But this morning, standing in the middle of this bustling market, he realized he had just found the whole world. James's world was now split by a brutal line. On one side was his father sitting in a sandcastle of arrogance and loneliness. On the other was Diep, the woman who gave him simple meals filled with warmth. James looked toward the horizon where his family's skyscraper stood tall and imposing. Then he turned back to Diep. He knew he had made the right choice. Because even if the whole world turns its back on you, as long as you have one person who truly loves you, you can rebuild a kingdom from the ruins. The battle between love and prejudice, between freedom and chains, would continue. But James was no longer afraid. He had knelt to propose not to beg for a blessing, but to prove that from now on, he would only kneel for love and never for cruel authority again.